in the long term, you are in big trouble. Money is power, and in a narcissistic relationship, power is abused. And this money will absolutely be a tool of control, punishment, and coercion. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the narcissistic person's hypocrisy about money. Now, the entire goal of this series is really to get to the core of some of the really complicated issues around money with narcissistic people. Because money is such a source of power and validation, as you can imagine, it can really become an uncomfortable space with narcissistic people. So let's talk a little bit about this, okay? So you're pretty darn clear now that narcissistic people use money to control other people, to get status, to get validation, to punish people, and if they don't have it, it sets off a vulnerable narcissistic cascade of sullenness, victimization, and rage. And another really difficult theme around money, especially in any kind of narcissistic relationship, is their financial hypocrisy and double standards around money. Any of you who've ever been in a narcissistic relationship have noticed that there are definitely two sets of standards. Now, what does that mean? Remember that hypocrisy is closely related to entitlement. One set of rules for you, one set of rules for me. Do as I say, not as I do. And it's a classical part of the narcissistic presentation and definitely plays a role in the financial piece. The financial hypocrisy of narcissism is such that a narcissistic person will have no problem spending lots of money on themselves or for themselves, but will become cruelly miserly when it comes to the basic needs of the people around them. Much as was laid out in the shaming series, they will shame people for spending money on themselves. Wow, you are selfish, spending that much of your money on a new coat. But they'll turn around and do it themselves. In essence, it does leave you wondering. Their shaming is very likely about envying what the other person is doing, and that the other person is doing something that they want to do for themselves and possibly doing it better than the narcissistic person. But the idea that someone else might be doing what they're doing, it brings up all that inadequacy. The two sets of rules around money for anyone with a narcissistic and entitled style, one set for themselves and another set for all other people, all of this makes money really complicated in any kind of narcissistic relationship. In fact, these kinds of hypocrisy-laden conversations about money are often what get people into the abyss of defend and explain and engage with narcissistic people. The narcissist may shame or judge someone for purchasing something or spending money on a particular experience and will then turn around and do it on themselves. And you will be sputtering and saying, but, but they will find a way to make it seem as though their situation is truly different, and heaven help you if you record them or put documentation of the hypocrisy back in their face. They will then write you off as petty and sort of surveillance-y and even paranoid for doing that. Remember the mantra of all narcissistic relationships. In addition to that, they won't change. You can't win. This hypocrisy about money brings in two of their themes: their superficiality and their status seeking, and their need for control. The superficiality is obvious. They need the things that signify their status, whatever those may be: cars, clothes, credentials, experiences, grown-up toys, houses. But that comes up against controlling. Almost always, narcissistic people are very controlling around money. And if you are in a relationship with them, they will often control the access to money. If you are in a family with them, they may be controlling about money, so they can spend with abandon or spend on anyone they want, but everyone else may be judged for engaging in that spending. This financial hypocrisy and the double standards also mean that they are the ones, the narcissistic people are the ones who get to decide what is worth spending money on. You may be in a family situation or an intimate relationship where there are some shared finances and perhaps want to have a collaborative decision about saving for something as a relation within your relationship or as a family. Maybe you want a house in a better school district. That house may be smaller, but it would be a significantly better education for your children. Or you might argue about school tuitions. But any of this is at odds with what the narcissistic person wants for themselves. And let's assume that they are the ones who have control over the money. What will happen is that their spending will be labeled as selfish or stupid, or will be judged contemptuously by the narcissistic person's more egocentric needs for the money. One parent may be interested in trying to create better opportunities for their children. The narcissistic parent might be more interested in getting a new car for themselves or living in a much bigger house, and may turn around and frame and manipulate it as, let the kids go to this other school, who cares if it's not that good? Then, hey, our kids will be the smartest kids at that school. Or some other twisted rationalization that allows them to stay in the big house with the new car, with little regard with how it's affecting other people in the system. Keep in mind that the self-righteous part of narcissism can result in them making no compromises around taking it and around it and taking a sort of simplistic view about it. It's my money. I earned it. I can do whatever I want with it. So they take a role if they earned it. So sometimes earned can be a bit subjective, but it's their money. So then they can spend with abandon. And yet they will criticize how other people spend the money that they themselves earned. It's back to the you can't win. Waiting for them to sign off and approve of how you spend money or do anything else in your life is like waiting for a train that is never going to come. This egocentricity about money can result in lots of inconsistency around it. And then, every so often, to get supply, the narcissistic person will engage in a generous flourish with their money, confusing everyone, who may now want to view the narcissistic person as generous. But keep in mind that spending was self-serving, they were spending this money on other people to get them narcissistic supply, not just to be generous to somebody else. Everything the narcissistic person does has to be viewed through the lens of how does it benefit them. Do as I say, not as I do, are words that narcissistic people live by. Their two sets of rules on money can be extremely galling when it comes to a relationship. And to be criticized for spending when you are in a relationship with someone who is spending it far more irresponsibly or selfishly can really be gaslighty and enraging. Remember, in the narcissistic person's mindset, everything is seen through only one point of view: what works for them, what gives them supply, and what allows them to better regulate themselves. Your spending goals, your needs, your plans are completely irrelevant. We know that in any kind of relationship, that financial issues may be the most contentious and often destabilizing type of issue that there is in close relationships, and likely cause the most relational disruption. Pay attention to these financial hypocrisies and double standards early on, because they definitely show up early on. If you aren't in agreement about money, whether realistically or philosophically, even early in a relationship, you never will be. Especially if you are with someone whose attitude about money is that it's all about me, And the way they approach money has massive blind spots. But financial stuff, again, philosophically, conversations about money with narcissistic folks early on will definitely show double standards and other red flags. Pay attention to those. Let me tell you, when it comes to money, sometimes that kind of rigid thinking rarely shifts. And we know narcissism is an extremely rigid style. But, a lot of us think of how generous and grandiose narcissistic people are with money. Let's talk a little bit about stinginess. The funny thing about narcissistic personality is that it is not a unidimensional, one-way only construction. It can look different ways because there are so many subtypes of narcissism. And money brings out the worst of it. One of the most confusing things regarding money with people who have narcissistic personalities is how they go back and forth between being either really, really stingy and miserly to being really almost overly generous. Well, there's a reason for that, and so let's break some of that down. Let's start with the stinginess, right? That's what we were leading with. Being stingy or miserly is not the same as being fiscally prudent or careful. Being stingy, for example, is keeping things around long after they are useful just because you think like, I'm not throwing this out, I paid good money for it. It's about easily being able to afford to split the check, but then not being willing to pay this, the same amount because the narcissistic person or stingy person didn't have dessert. It's about fiercely enforcing the upper limits on an office holiday grab bag gift. It's about keeping track of how much money they spend each year on family birthday gifts and then reminding everyone how much they spend. It's about telling an elderly parent that, this year I think I may not give you a birthday gift because I had to chip in a little extra money for your wheelchair or your walker. It's gross. It's petty. It's small-minded, it's uncomfortable, and it is not done out of necessity, but out of a real mean-spiritedness. And you can see how the stuff of narcissism comes into play here. The lack of empathy, the entitlement, the low-grade paranoia, and the sense that people are always trying to take advantage of them. It's not about big ticket stuff that has real financial ramifications. And stinginess is often accompanied by rumination. They will track every cent and even keep these bizarre records. So for example, if there is a divorce or a will or an estate or a trust or even a friendship, be prepared that they would present someone with a bill for past anniversary gifts or childhood expenses or a dinner you had years ago just because they're mad. There is a meanness to stinginess, and it overlaps quite clearly with the meanness of the narcissistic personality. But what confuses the hell out of people is that sometimes this very same narcissist, and if not this one, others, can be very generous, almost grandiosely generous. Think love bombing, expensive gifts, big nights out. Narcissistic folks may throw down the credit card and pick up the check for a big group of people on dinner out or a bar tab. Everyone will clap and congratulate them. Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, you're so generous. And you can see how much the narcissistic person loves that grandiose moment. But at the same time, if you watch really carefully, you can see it on their face. They love the grandiose moment and the show of it all. But there is a tiny resentment underneath the mask. It's primal. At a primitive level, they know they got the narcissistic supply, which relieves the tension because they always need it. But now we'll slowly start the nagging, ruminative doubt of they only like me because I paid for this big dinner, and I will guarantee you they will bring it up at some point in some future argument. Ugh, your friends are such freeloaders. I'm sure they want me to come. They expect me to pick up the check. I picked it up that one time. They expected that. Or your family's a bunch of users, and they're always just waiting for me to pay. Or, ugh, you're such a gold digger, always looking to me for money. Even when the reality was that everyone was not only fully ready to split the check, but really, really were pushing and trying to. But nope, the narcissist needed their grandiose moment. Remember the golden rule of narcissistic relationships. You can't win. As a general pattern, narcissistic personalities tend to be generous when it is public, when it will get them supply, when it will get them noticed. It's what we can call something called agentic generosity. It's a means to an end. It's something they do actively to get what they need. It's not in the spirit of generosity, the idea of like, I'm lucky enough to have, and it makes me happy to share what I do have. And they might even think like, gosh, everyone around this table has been really kind to me, and it's nice on this day to be able to do something nice. No, 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 no. For narcissistic people, everything's a transaction to get something, usually narcissistic supply, or to posture. Narcissists may use these episodes of generosity as a way to shame someone else. They'll toss down the card and say to someone at the table out loud in front of everyone, hey, you, I know you're going through a tough time, and I know that your job doesn't pay that well. Listen, it's really nice to be able to show you a high-end night out at a decent place instead of those usual dumps you go to. It's you, and it's gross, and it can feel humiliating and degrading for not only the people on the receiving end, but to anyone who's witnessing this. Now, because of the narcissistic tendency to feeling persecuted or victimized, if they feel that their generosity isn't getting enough gratitude, they will become sullen and glum and passive-aggressive. You almost wish they would tell you, how many thank yous do you want for this necklace, for this gift card, for this dinner? Because if you don't thank them right, or you don't thank them enough, they will experience a narcissistic injury and they will lash out. If others don't thank them enough, it's exactly the same. They will also, as I already said, they will often ruminate after they've been generous. This idea of, I'm being taken advantage of. These people are only coming because they want to drink my great wine from my collection or hang out in my nice house. Everybody always expects me to take care of them. Meanwhile, no one's expecting that. The narcissistic person just keeps doing it. They will whine endlessly about it, but it's a real catch-22 for people with narcissistic personalities because most narcissists struggle with being alone, even the vulnerable narcissists, because they need supply, so they can regulate themselves. And they like to dominate social interactions, so they will use money to control those interactions and control the narrative, and then resent the idea that people spend time with them because they spend money on them. And, we could look at this in the certain kind of transactional relationships out there. There's definitely a certain breed of narcissistic person who consistently gets into transactional relationships with partners. Usually it's someone older who has the resources, finding someone much younger but who's considered very attractive or something like that. The younger partner is often there for the free ride and for the goodies. The older narcissistic person is aggravated because they want the attractive younger partner, but they resent how much they have to spend and want the younger partner to want them just because they're lovable. Good luck with that. It's not how transactional relationships work. But ultimately, the cardinal rule of narcissistic relationships, you can't win. Now, this whole stinginess thing you can see it happen in families where generosity and stinginess are used as a way to either keep people close or punish them. If you purchase the family members, they will then show up to holiday dinners and birthdays and other family events so that the family member who's got the money can hold court. But the generous, high-spending narcissist is aware that the reason that people are at the family dinner is for the money, and the narcissistic family members, especially parents, will often use money as a way to triangulate, manipulate, and play favorites. And then if a narcissistic family member spends money on someone and those people don't show up, they will feel very betrayed and let them know it. Now, over time, especially in a classically love bomb, devalue, discard cycle, the transition from generosity to miserliness can be seen. It will transition from gifts and nights out and vacations to lots of penny pinching and then accusations about you only being in it with them for the money. It may go from them consistently picking up the check, even if you offer to help out, to accusing you of using them at the end of the meal. So you might find yourself paying more and more for meals out, even meals that you cannot always afford, especially if there's a significant difference in how much money you earn compared to the narcissistic partner. It may manifest in them becoming punitive about household expenses, and the marked contrast will be striking. You might find that you went from going first class to Paris to hearing complaints about why do the kids need new clothes for school over the course of the relationship. And there is plenty of money to spend, and yet they're complaining. Remember, all relationships are transactional for narcissistic people. So it's about the narcissist spending money to get supply or love or adoration. And then when they finally kind of have that relationship nailed down or are no longer really interested in that person, then they no longer want to spend it, and then they feel used. So then they sort of slide into that stinginess territory. Money is such a complicated language to speak with a narcissistic person. It doesn't matter if they are a billionaire or if they are broke. It always raises issues. Their generosity is actually really just a way to control people, control the conversation, and a quick way to be perceived as a nice person. Their stinginess is a manifestation of their incapacity for empathy, intimacy, and it also reflects their chronically sort of just under the line paranoid sense that they are being taken advantage of. There is little middle ground, and as such, always beware a gift horse. With the narcissist, gifts always carry strings. Ask yourself if that gift is actually worth the cost. What happens when you loan a narcissist money? So I'd like you all to reflect on that question. Maybe you've even done it. What happens when you loan a narcissist money? What's your guess? Drop it in the comments. I'm guessing, because I'm doing this now, I can't see your comments, is most of you said you ain't going to get it back. And that's a good bet. Why? Because narcissistic people actually kind of feel entitled to your money. They have, interestingly, people who are narcissistic have enough of a filter to not say, hey, I'm great, so you should give me money. But they're probably thinking it. Narcissistic personality is sort of associated with shady, shifty, deceitful, gaslighty, and impulsive behavior. So again, all of that means that not only do you not get your money back, but also that you may be so gaslighted and manipulated that by the time that they are done with you, you may even think that they don't really owe it back to you and that maybe they did you a favor by letting you loan them money. It's really confusing. Well, since narcissistic folks are such hotshots, why would they even need to borrow money? Well, in some cases, it's realistic. They just may not have any. And because appearances are so important to them, most of them, except for the self-righteous ones who that's their own kind of animal. Most narcissistic folks are relatively impulsive with money and will spend it to get validation. They'll spend it on how they look. They'll spend it on other people. They'll want to look like they have a certain lifestyle. And as a result, they may simply borrow money to supplement what little money they have to just look better. They may also borrow money in the name of grandiosity, an idea they want to get off the ground, some deal or some great business that they want to get everyone into, that sort of thing. Just as a sidebar, self-righteous narcissistic folks are the ones who are a little bit funny about money. They're really rigid about money. They probably won't ask you for any. They will criticize how you spend your own money. They won't ever use their money to help someone else. They will use money to shame and control others. So they kind of do money in a different way. So the other question may be, does it bring up shame for narcissistic people to borrow money? Probably yes. But that happens at an almost unconscious level, and they're really masterful at coming up with rationalizations and to engage in denial. Things like, well, nobody ever's ever paid me what I'm worth, so they may actually feel entitled to people giving them money. But at the core of it, if the narcissistic person needs the money, it will bring up shame for them to ask you. And if in fact you are actually able to loan them the money, they may actually also resent you for being able to do so and resent the dependency on you that it raises. So they will project that shame on you and hate you even though you're bailing them out. It gets really messy. A narcissistic person may also try something slick, like borrowing some money from you and then they pay it back. Then they'll borrow a little more, maybe a little more, and they'll pay it back. They may slowly increase the amounts. It's like a grooming process, and pay you back. And if you don't know their financial situation well and they seem to be portraying a decent lifestyle, you might actually become confident, because they already have paid you back in the past, that they'll keep paying you back. And when they don't pay you back and you ask them about it, they'll gaslight you and say, oh, what's wrong? Don't you trust me? I've paid you back in the past. Of course I'm going to pay you back. And they'll make it really aversive for you to ask about the money. Every time you bring it up, they'll argue with you, they'll shame you, they'll call you petty, they'll call you miserly or other names, or they'll just give you the runaround. And this behavior may leave you questioning yourself and also disincentivize you from having the conversation with them. And you just may not want to keep asking them because the conversations are so convoluted and you just simply get exhausted. The way a narcissistic person gets money from you may not even be a direct ask. It may be a version of backdoor borrowing. They might say something like, I forgot my credit card, can you front me? My ATM card isn't working, my Venmo isn't working, my PayPal isn't working, can you just cover me? I'll obviously pay you back so it's not a loan. But then you may find yourself having to ask for the money back. They'll claim like, oh, I forgot about it. And if you're someone who's conflict or request averse and don't like asking these things, this may start getting really uncomfortable for you. And in fact, when they first ask you to front them, and if you were to ask something like, hey, are you going to pay me back? They may even contemptuously sniff at you and say, please, of course I'm going to pay you back. Who do you think I am? Do you think I'm some kind of freeloader? And then you may feel bad for suggesting otherwise. So it all becomes a very twisted manipulation. Getting into any kind of financial setup with a narcissistic person is always going to be a mess. Money has too much surplus meaning for them, so it will always end up badly. But it's not always the straight up loan as much as it is the backdoor ask that creates the problems. Or even the victimized ask where they say, everything in my life is going wrong. And then you, being the empathic soul you are, might just give them money. Usual guidelines on any money lending to anyone, which is basically never expect money you lend back. So don't give any amount of money you can't afford to lose. Lie if you have to, but be prepared to lose it, especially when you loan money to a narcissistic person. And just as a sort of final follow-up question, you may be wondering, what if you try to borrow money from them? All I can say is holy heaven. They may pull out some kind of 50% loan shark agreement, or they may just say no, or they may humiliate and degrade you about why you need it, or even make gross suggestions on how you can pay it back to them. If they have it and you need it, to be in that disempowered a position, you would probably do better with a predatory lender or credit card borrowing fees than to pay the psychological interest rate of borrowing it from them. If it's a self-righteous narcissistic person you're trying to get the money from, they are so miserly that they will lecture you first, shame you and humiliate you, and then still not give you the money. Money and narcissistic people never mix when it comes to any form of relationship. Don't borrow, don't lend, and don't expect it to end well. The interest rate on borrowed money, whenever narcissistic people are involved, is basically an annual percentage rate on your soul. It's kind of in opposition to what we think is the truth, right? They're the big person on town. I'll pick up the check. I'll take you on a lavish vacation. I'll buy you a fabulous present. Like, that's not cheap. Well, that's part of the whole love bombing, win you over manipulation phase. Once those glory days are done, you start to see a very different picture. Narcissists, in fact, can be quite miserly. There's a sort of a hypersensitivity / paranoia that narcissists have about them. They often feel that other people are taking advantage of them, and they often tend to keep like a mental ledger or a mental balance sheet. Like, I did this for you, now you have to do this for me. They're very quid pro quo in their relationships, and that matters even in matters of money. I spent this much, I expect you to do this for me. And so it may not be as much as I spent this much, you owe me this much, but there can be something that feels very transactional about relationships with narcissists. Maybe not as unseemly as paying someone for sex, but it is on that level of, hey, I'm providing for you, I should be able to control you. Or I gave you this, so I expect you to do that or make me look good. And it's very, it's made very obvious, which means it doesn't feel very good. There's a real lack of insight to their cheapness too. They don't realize that they are sometimes, they turn on and off their generosity. And it's the on and off that makes you realize that their generosity is actually relatively manipulative. They'll be generous at times, it's going to get them something. So when they pick up the check for everyone, it's so they can look good to a large group of people. But then you may go out with them one-on-one where there's no one to impress, and they may not pick up that check. They may be very inconsistent too. Generous for weeks, maybe even months, and then one day it'll switch and they'll say, what are you doing? Why are you buying them? And you'll be like, oh, okay, gosh, I got familiarized with this is how you wanted to do things. And then they'll change the rules on you. Changing the rules on people is a great way to always keeping them kind of mentally off balance, but also for the narcissists, because they're so insecure, they will often use money as a way to say, hey, I can win you over. You have to be my friend because I'm buying you stuff. But in the same breath, they don't like that that's the case. So then all of a sudden they'll withdraw it. But when we think about someone being cheap, we usually think about this in terms of money. Money's not the only resource we have. We also have resources like time and emotion. So where they can also be cheap is with their time. They won't give you a lot of it. They will be very chintzy with it. Say, yeah, I'll come to your concert for a little while, or yeah, I'll come to your work thing for a little while. It'll seem like they hold back on the probably oftentimes the only thing you want from someone you love, which is their time or their presence. They may show up to anything, including life, but they're not really there. It feels like they're either always on their device or watching TV or just not plugged in with you. They're just cheap. They're cheap with their time, they're cheap with their money, and they can be cheap with themselves in terms of how much of it they'll give over. The inconsistency in their so-called generosity, the kind of manipulativeness of their generosity, and the way they often will view money as a way to get things done rather than a real sharing of it, it feels kind of gross. And it actually, after a while, it can feel really uncomfortable to accept their gifts and generosity because you know a generous Monday could be followed by a really almost verbally abusive Thursday. After a while, the gifts feel, or the money feels like an uncomfortable offset. You'll really desperately want to split the check or take on the whole check yourself to avoid this feeling. And sometimes they'll even go so far as to believe you owe them. That, hey, I've done all these things for you, now you owe me, but you may not be able to provide at the same level, or they may make fun of the way you're able to do things. So you might feel like in a fair world, you're right, you took me out to dinner last week, let me take you out to dinner this week. But if you choose a place that they don't think is good enough for them, that might become a space in which they'll humiliate you. So their cheapness can play out in lots of different ways. It's often a reflection of some of their tendency towards manipulation. It can be also that the sort of the narcissist cheapness is a lack of insight. It can also be a real entitlement that they feel like I'm owed things at times. And again, their tendency to view things as quite transactional. The fact is, though, it is quite uncomfortable. And as they always say, always look a gift horse in the mouth. I think we can forward that to always look a narcissist gift in the mouth too. It often carries extra meaning, and their cheapness and their miserliness, and not just with money, but with time and with themselves, can feel like a really destabilizing place where, interestingly, their behavior, their being cheap, can leave you feeling cheapened yourself. Now, this idea of a narcissistic person making more money than the other person in a relationship may be the most common playing out of a relationship scenario with a narcissistic person. Research suggests that narcissistic people, on average, do tend to make more money, they tend to have greater career success, and they are more likely to pursue and achieve positions of leadership. And as a result of all of this, your narcissistic partner is likely to make more money than you. It may also be what made them more attractive to you. Unfortunately, people are drawn to successful people and money. Now, society has always gotten behind the idea that a rich partner is a better partner, or a wealthy partner is a better partner. And narcissistic people are also more likely to be chosen as good choices as marital partners, again, as indicated by the research. Even if when you met, you were making similar salaries or are both just starting out, the ambitious and assiduous focus on work and money and power that we observe in people with narcissistic personalities means that they may ultimately end up outpacing you money-wise. And as I raised in another video in this series, before long, especially if you perhaps decide to start a family or the narcissistic partner has to move for a job, it may result in the other partner giving up a job, freelancing, or stopping working to either care for children or care for the household, which ends up being much more convenient for the narcissistic person. And then there is a clear differential in incomes, right? Because if somebody's not working, then the person not working is definitely not going to be making any money, and they're going to be making less. If you're not working, if you are working, I should say, they may mock the amount of money you make, they may make fun of your job, or they may find other ways to frame the income disparity through a shaming lens. However you get here, if the narcissistic person makes more money than you, the short answer to that is, in the long term, you are in big trouble. Money is power, and in a narcissistic relationship, power is abused. And this money will absolutely be a tool of control, punishment, and coercion. You may find yourself in the uncomfortable position of having to ask for money for fundamental needs in the household. You may find yourself in the dark about your family finances, and you may find yourself shamed for spending any money on yourself. Initially, in the love bombing stage, everything can seem good. If they make more money, then you may find yourself in a situation in which maybe you're getting gifts or being taken care of or not having to worry about the headaches or the details of money. All of this can be quite seductive, reassuring, and fun, until it's not. And once the devaluing begins, it stops being fun. During the devaluing phase, you can expect to be criticized about money, how you spend it, how much you have, and even start being viewed suspiciously. And during the discard, especially if it's a dissolution of a marriage, you will be in a horrific, epic battle that will change you forever. Listen, the narcissistic partner may be the one who encouraged you to pull back at work, and now they are criticizing you for not bringing in enough. If it ends up proceeding to a full-on divorce, narcissistic people who make more, even much more money, even though by the letter of the law in family court are supposed to pay spousal support, they will fight that requirement tooth and nail. The power differential engendered by a narcissistic person making more money in a relationship can make the relationship very uncomfortable for a very long time. Another issue that makes this challenging is the suspiciousness that accompanies the narcissistic personality style. The suspiciousness that is observed in narcissistic personalities can sort of look like a low-grade paranoia, a kind of constant victimization, and a chronic sense of persecution, and that, like, the sense that other people are out to get them. As a result, if they are earning more money, then there's a constant suspiciousness that you are taking advantage of them, that you are only in it for the money, that you, in essence, are basically a grifter. And yet, if you were to raise the idea of earning your money or earning your own money or pursuing a job or something in your career that would result in more money, in more than a few cases, they will either mock that idea or even get angry at you for thinking that they aren't earning enough. Remember the mantra, you can't win. Listen, unless you were in a really strangely unique situation where you are in a relationship with someone who maybe has the same job as you at the same level, in any relationship, someone is always going to make more money. When there are two healthy people in a relationship, then there are shared conversations about money, collaboration about family budgets, clarity on role expectations, an attempt to create equality in other ways in the relationship. In a narcissistic relationship, they want the power that comes from making more money and will use that differential, that income differential, to control, punish, or to harness as a sort of weapon to get what they need. There can also be a strange culture around gift giving in a narcissistic relationship. They might buy from time to time, might buy you expensive gifts and expect you to ooh and ah, but when you need basics for the household, you will be met with resistance. In a family system, it doesn't play out so clearly. If other family members make more money, the same themes of suspiciousness and coercion and power abuses will also unfold. And by and large, it's always best to go Dutch in these family situations and not expect the narcissistic family members who make more money to actually step up. Now, more people in close relationships are in this situation of somebody making more than the other than not, believe it or not, because it is more probable, like I said, that the narcissistic person will make more money. Be aware that other than in the earliest days of love bombing, this dynamic will rarely be healthy in the long term. The most important thing to remember is that no matter what relationship you are in, healthy, narcissistic, you name it, always stay on top of the finances. Never assume that another person is taking care of them. Even if you don't care for money and figures, even if the two of you don't have a lot of money, figure it out. If somebody really pushes back early in a relationship on you really making inquiries about money and how you budget and how you manage it, that is a massive, massive red flag. Nobody should ever be unclear on their own financial picture. This lack of interest in your own finances is a position that a lot of narcissistic people will take advantage of. And when they make more money, they feel entitled to having access to information and not being transparent with you. Again, if it's early days, you may really want to consider if this is healthy for you, because it can be really risky if and when things go south, because what you could find yourself is fighting the battle of your life for money that you need. And if you've been out of the workplace for a long time, it can be very hard to make up that difference. So this power differential created by somebody making much more, and not only the power differential, but the need for power in somebody who has this kind of personality, can make this a precarious place. So make sure you educate yourself and train yourself to be your own financial advocate. Thanks again, 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 advocate.